Welcome, Europe. Welcome to an hour's conversation about borders, physical borders and virtual borders. The event is organized to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Schengen Agreement, which was entered into in 1985 by 5 countries, France, Germany, and the Benelux countries. So this is what we are celebrating today. Today there are 26 members of the Schengen Agreement. And by the way, tomorrow we will see the reopening of most of Europeans' borders. So there's also every reason to celebrate that. The initiative is part of a project called A Call to Europe, which is a cooperative effort between Ethnos, an Italian TV company, New Europeans, a civil society organization, We Belong, which is a blog and a platform for new daughters of Europe, and finally Europe Future Fringe, which is an effort to go along with the official conference on the future of Europe organized by the Commission. So this is the context, and to put life to the organization, we've invited a number of guests. And on screen, we have Alicia Vinko. Alicia is Vice President of Young European Socialists. She'll tell a little bit more about herself later. We have Esther Nagy from Hungary. We have Professor Dimitris Balas, who is Chair of the Economic Geography Faculty of Social Sciences at Groningen, and we have Yasmin Wiran, a co-founder of We Belong. I would like our guests to briefly tell where they are located and maybe add a few words about themselves, and then we'll go into the conversation. So welcome everybody, and also to all our viewers on Facebook. So I'll start with, from the top left-hand corner on my screen, that's Dimitris.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I am extremely happy and honored to take part in this conversation. I live and work in the city of Groningen, which is in the north of the Netherlands. I'm a professor of economic geography here at the University of Groningen. And as you may be able to tell from my name and accent, I'm originally from Greece. And I'd like to say also that I've lived and I've widely traveled around Europe, and I have also lived and worked a few months in Austria and many, many years in England, in particular Leeds and Sheffield. And I like to joke that I have a Greek Yorkshire accent. And more recently, I have also, before moving to Groningen, I lived and worked on the island of Lesbos, when this island in the border of Europe started becoming the center of attention, media attention, and political attention because of the refugee crisis. And I will refer to that again in the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dimitris. And we'll move on to Elisha. Where are you located?
Hi, my name is Elisha Vinko. I'm right now in Brussels, but I am from Schengen, but I am in Brussels because I study sustainable development at the CoLive. And so basically I just went from one European city to another European city. And I'm very much looking forward to this discussion.
Okay, very good. And Esther from Hungary. Where?
Yes, my name is Esther Nagy. I'm in Budapest at the moment. I'm a former diplomat. I'm economist by formation. I do civil activism. I'm the Secretary General of the Hungarian section of the Union of European Federalists in Hungary. And I also do journalism. I participate in an online radio and a program about the European Union called Euphoria. That's a very new thing what I started to do.
Thanks a lot, Esther. And we finish with you, Yasmin. A few words about you.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to represent We Belong, which is the partner organization that is organizing this event. We work to give a voice. We're committed to give a voice to immigrant daughters living in Europe. So I'm from Italy, but I live in France, in Grenoble, which is, next to the border.
Thanks a lot, Yasmin. We've organized this conversation in the following way. We will give each panel participant 3 minutes by way of introduction. But before we go into that, Yasmin, you would make a few links to previous conversations that we had as a part of Call to Europe. So Yasmin, you have the screen.
Thank you. I mean, I'm super happy to have this conversation today because it's at the core of our partnership with New Europeans. We started this project, the Call to Europe, because we wanted to discuss on borders, on the importance of the European Union as a common unity project, but also about mental borders. We discussed, Roger and I, during our previous conversations about this idea that even though we should all have a common identity in Europe, we still, see many people arising this issue of, differences, diversity, and seeing it as a threat to the European Union. So my commitment here is also to ensure that we, as much as we celebrate Schengen and we reopen tomorrow Schengen, we also realize that the borders in our minds, the invisible borders that, threaten the European Union still exist.
Okay, thanks a lot, Yasmin. And then we'll go into the 3-minute introductions. And here I think it's natural to start with somebody living in Schengen. So Elisha, you have 3 minutes to tell us what your views are.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I'd just like to continue kind of there where Yasmin ended. And again, thank you very much to all of the hosts for inviting us. So it being the 35th anniversary of the signing of Schengen today, and the final border closings all across the Schengen area being open tomorrow, and in many places also the lockdown measures are eased. I think this discussion is very timely because everywhere we are talking about building back better. And I think that building back better should not just focus on the social measures and the economic measures that we need to take, but it could also refer to the borders that might still exist in the minds of some people, or the hard borders that still exist very much on the map. And this is just very important for us also, because I am speaking as one of the vice presidents of the Young European Socialists, that these borders in the future will not be there anymore. Most importantly though, today I am here as a young European activist who has grown up in Schengen. And I think, what does growing up in Schengen feel like? I don't really think there's much of a difference between growing up in the border region, growing up in Schengen, than growing up in any other border region, in the sense that part of your life is, for instance, that maybe grocery shopping is an international affair. You just cross borders because that is the closest supermarket. Or you have friends just living across the border. So that is, I think, very much a common thing around all of Europe. But then what does make Schengen special in this sense is that we had the opportunity and the privilege of having some visionaries in the government 35 years back who decided, okay, let's do this. Let's have this signing in Schengen, in an area that touches with France and Germany. And because of that, we also have the a Centre Européen Schengen, that is a Schengen museum talking about the European Union, but also about the agreement itself. And in preparation for this talk, I also talked to them, and like many of us, they are also shocked by how the borders were just closed on a whim to combat a virus which does not respect borders in the first place. But luckily, I've also been told that since the measures of lockdown have been eased, there has been a surprising amount of visitors to the Schengen Museum, which is super cool for them, because that just shows that people believe in the idea of Schengen, and that maybe this temporary closing of the borders just showed how easy it is that such an important acquis can be taken away, and that it is important for all of us to stand up and make sure that this does not happen again. This morning also, they had a whole ceremony around this, where the Luxembourgish foreign minister was there, Jean Asselborn, but also the person who signed the Schengen agreement for Luxembourg, Robert Goebbels. And I think, what does Schengen mean to me? Schengen to me is not just about the physical act of open borders, but it also stands for an idea which is why I actually really like what the foreign minister said this morning, and that is that the closure of borders is not an image worthy of Schengen. And I think in that imagery, you can really see that it's not only, doesn't only functionally stand for something, for open borders, but it also stands for something greater, the crafting of a common European identity, and like a feeling of camaraderie, respect and solidarity, where people beyond national borders come together and see and choose what they want to be. And we all know this implementation is unfortunately far from perfect. There are still many borders, physical and mental, that need to be overcome. But I'm sure with time and with discussions such as this, we will get closer to that point and have a true Schengen, not only on the map, but also in our minds and hearts.
Thanks a lot, Elisha, for this introduction. And I'll move straight on, and now we go to Hungary, I think. So Esther, your 3 minutes are up.
Thank you. For me, it's really an interesting reflection, because 35 years ago, we were in a different regime. We lived in socialism, and I experienced it as a child. And I remember lively that we had restrictive opportunities to travel to the West. We could go only once in every 3 years to Western countries, and we had limited access to the hard currency. And at that time, 35 years ago, we didn't even dream of being able to join to Schengen one day. And that's something which makes me really think that we should really appreciate that Hungary is part of Schengen now. And especially now we could have a very recent experience what happens when the borders are closed again, or when the borders are even hermetically closed. Okay, they were not hermetically closed that time, but that was much longer term. So even these 3 months of restriction can remind us how much it means to us to be able to reach out, to be able to get into a car or get on a train and take our ID cards and travel over to other European countries. And when I was a university student in the 90s, I was absolutely amazed by the opportunity that I could travel. I used an Interrail ticket, and I spent 1 month traveling around all over Europe, from Spain up to Sweden. And it was like, I was overwhelmed of the opportunity. And I think it's really important for us and for all of us Europeans to embrace this thing, and also to really reach out to us, because now I think we seem to take it for granted. We got used to it. We think, okay, that's normal, but it's not normal in this sense, or it is something which is an achievement. And I think that the free movement within the European Union is one of the greatest achievements. And now, unfortunately, we have our political leadership is a little bit taking us away also from that, and that's a huge worry here for us, that they are more Eurosceptical or critical of Europe sometimes, and I think it's dangerous, and it's not good for the people. You know, the Hungarians are mostly pro-European, and they really like to be in the European Union, and I think it's really a great opportunity also now to reach out to each other and then to talk about it, even on an online way. So thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Esther. And we move straight on to Dimitris. Tell us what you think.
Thank you, Paul. So I'd like to make 3 points regarding Schengen. Very briefly, first, I would like to talk about the economic benefits of this. Eliza made some remarks that are relevant there, I think. And then I would like to talk about also offering a personal perspective on the bolstering of European identity and the sense of belonging that Schengen helps bolster, and what it means to be European, and how, finally, I'd like to say a bit more about what it means to be European, and why all this discussion is also relevant, not just the physical borders, but also borders in the mind. So first of all, very briefly, the economic and economic geography perspective. There are many studies and evidence suggesting that this has been extremely successful, and in terms of economic performance. There is very strong evidence that Schengen had a very positive effect on the European economy by improving local and regional market performance and the local economy, commuting between regions, border regions, but also shopping, groceries, like Elisa said, and also having a very strong positive effect on tourism. And I can tell a bit more about that by coming from Greece, seeing the evidence there with Greece being in the Schengen zone. And interestingly, some of the countries that benefit the most from Schengen include Central European countries led by politicians recently who seem to be quite skeptical about it. And I think that relates to what Esther said before. So the second point I'd like to make is that open borders and what that Schengen represents enhance the sense of European identity and the feelings of belonging to Europe and of a sense of European citizenship. I can certainly say that for myself, but I think there is strong evidence also academically. There is, when traveling between countries and meeting people, traveling with no passport controls, you have the feeling of traveling in the same country, a country called Europe. And feeling also that home, Europe is home. And I find that from a personal perspective, I find it interesting in Groningen and also before in England, when people asked me when I went to Greece back on holiday, they would say, are you going back home? And I would think, home is Europe. I don't know where is home. Home is many places in Europe. Europe is my home. So I think open borders help bolster that kind of identity, making it also more affordable and easier to travel within Europe. You have record numbers of Europeans who have been to other countries. We talk to each other. We realize how much we have in common between countries, and that we also realize that the real divisions are quite often within countries rather than between countries. And I think Europeans, so for example, Europeans living in the north of the Netherlands, for instance, in the beautiful Wadden Sea Islands, they may have much more in common with islanders in Greece than people in Amsterdam. And traveling and meeting people, you get that feel of how much we have in common. So also I think, and moving on to my last point, having open borders also makes it more likely for Europeans to realize how much we have in common in terms of values, and the values that the European Union is founded upon, underpinning ideals such as respect of human rights, including the far too little celebrated abolition of the death penalty, protection of minorities, all described in the Copenhagen criteria that need to be met before any country can even be considered to be a member state of the European Union. So with regards to the third point, I'd like to say that this relates to borders in the mind and the virtual iron curtain, especially, I would say, and from personal, I can offer some personal perspective there in relation to the refugee crisis. I would argue, also having lived in Lesbos, I would argue that offering sanctuary and welcoming refugees in Europe is extremely consistent with European values. And when I worked in Lesbos and lived there, I was very moved to see amazing manifestations of humanity and solidarity from local islanders, but also people from all over Europe. And again, we have sharing of values and realizing how much we have in common to demonstrate these values in practice, supporting refugees and putting in practice one of the things that it means to be European, the European values. And I would say, just to conclude, that in contrast, the values that some politicians who are hostile to refugees, these values have nothing to do with European values and European identity. So, for example, I think it was a Hungarian prime minister who said in 2015 that what we have at stake is the European way of life and survival of European values, and he alleged that this is threatened by refugees and migrants. I would say this kind of thinking is actually in contrast, and this is what threatens European values. What has been happening in Hungary under Viktor Orban's rule and worrying signs of authoritarianism, this threatens European way of life and the Hungarian way of life as well, because, as Esther said, Hungarians feel Europeans very strongly. And the same goes for all extremist parties across Europe. The far-right parties especially, their values have nothing to do with Europe. They say they want to protect Europe, but they have nothing to do with European values, which I would say that they're also universal human values. And the values of far-right parties, for example, are very much closer to the values of authoritarian regimes and the brutality of ISIS and other similar regimes from which the refugees are fleeing. They're coming to Europe to flee from that. And I would like to conclude by saying that when I lived and worked in Lesbos and also here in Groningen, I have met refugees who are very passionate about European values, and they have dreamt of coming to Europe because of the European way of life, because of the freedom and diversity that we have. So very many of these refugees share these values underpinning the European Union, unlike politicians and supporters of extremist parties.
Thanks a lot, Dimitris. Thanks a lot. And we move on now to Yasmin. You have your 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. I mean, I can't help but react to what Dimitris had just said. I mean, you raised so many interesting points. You're talking as a European, a true European that has lived in so many countries, and I can also say I've lived in Spain, in the Netherlands, in Italy, in France, but I've been a lot in Brussels for my work, so I really feel I don't belong to a country. But at the same time, because of my work, I've been privileged to travel a lot, but I've also been, subjected to some issues that other Europeans don't face. And, you were mentioning, Dimitri, something very interesting, which is the privilege to travel without a passport. For me, it's not the case. The only time I dare to travel without my Italian passport, the Italian ID, identification card is the most falsifiable in the world, apparently, because it's a piece of paper. And so I traveled with that card, my ID, to Bulgaria, and I did a stopover to Greece. Both in Greece and in Bulgaria had a heavy control, people asking me if I would actually speak Italian, and they wanted to check if I actually was Italian. In Bulgaria, they asked me to take off my veil. They took a picture of me without my veil, and they had in that room where I was, they had a full, wall of pictures of refugees with all their pictures, that they take. So apparently they were gonna put my picture there, asking me why I was coming to Bulgaria. I was coming for a European conference on the integration of refugees through labor work. And I was like, even I am not considered as European, and I'm born and raised in Europe. I have European roots. I'm half Italian. So imagine refugees. That's all I could think, imagine how and what they face on a daily basis in Europe. So I'm always happy to see people like Dimitris openly advocating and saying things as they are, advocating for rights that for me are universal, but also values that are European that we should treasure, which is solidarity, human rights, respect, and equality, because today I don't feel I'm treated as an equal citizen of Europe.
All right, thanks a lot for introductions to the subject. I think it would be interesting to go into the question of virtual borders. What do we actually mean by that? Could you give us examples of what do you mean when you talk about virtual borders? And I think I'll start with you, Esther.
Yes, to connect with Dimitris and Yasmin. In the 2015 refugee crisis, there was a huge anti-immigration campaign in Hungary, in a country which is not a target for immigration in general. But there was huge government propaganda to say that immigrants come to take our jobs away, to endanger our culture, to do whatever. I don't even remember, but it was all big billboards were all over the place. And people in Hungary who don't know many migrants or many immigrants, because we don't have them here, they started to be suspicious about everybody, like I have an aunt who is a pensioner and who is participating in excursions with a group of Hungarian pensioners. And once they came out of a forest, and there were 2 police cars waiting for them, because the village people thought they would be migrants. And the policeman actually asked for their papers. And they were all Hungarians, So that's a weird story, how to create kind of an enemy, and how to create suspicion, and how to create how to stop tolerance in a country in this sense. Or and I think that this is kind of raising virtual Iron Curtain. Also, okay, Orban also raised a physical fence in the southern border of Hungary, which also made us think that, okay, we stopped the Iron Curtain also around 30 years ago. And why we have to set up borders or fences or whatever, it has a very bad connotation in Hungary. But the other side of this is also this mental infiltration of suspicion, intolerance, and being afraid of something which is unknown. And this is very dangerous for our society, in my opinion, and not to speak of the fact that we should be happy if some people would like to come here. I personally have a German husband. He came over to Hungary, and it's really a good European thing that he could come over and he could start to work here. And it's a good thing that there was not a problem with it. But even other like other nationalities who would come here, we should be happy about that. And the other factor, what Orban also said, that the Gypsy communities are own migrants, which is again something to divide the society internally, because Gypsy community, they have Hungarian passports. They were born in Hungary, they live in Hungary, they have maybe a little bit different skin color, but why do they have to be different? Or why do they have to be treated or putting this emblem of pejorative words like migrant? You know, it has become a really pejorative word in Hungary. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a huge damage that is being done. And it's unfortunately also it has a huge impact on the way of thinking of the people and how they get more isolated from the outside and how they are less tolerant with the people who are a little bit different than what they would think is normal, you know? And that's something which is very dangerous.
But I think I'd like a few more viewpoints from the other members of the panel on examples of what you consider to be virtual borders. So Dimitri, can you give us some concrete examples of that from your perspective?
Well, I think I'd like to relate to, first of all, I'd like to say I'm very sorry to hear the experiences that Yasmin had in Bulgaria and Greece. And I think this is an excellent example of borders of the mind and of thinking of Europe in terms of divisions and borders. Words that come to mind are Fortress Europe, forgetting that actually at the heart of what Europe is about is the motto of the European Union, Europe, a continent united in diversity. So diversity is what we celebrate. This is what open borders are around, united in diversity, and at the same time withholding the key values, which are values about humanity, universal. I'm talking about modern European values, which are the values that are universal human values. So I would say, sorry, Paul.
I was just curious, Dimitris, why are people scared of differences?
Well, I don't know if that's for me, for example, there's not a biggest difference from, let's say you have someone who shares neo-Nazi or Nazi ideas. They're very, very different, and I'm scared of them. Okay, so I'm scared of that difference. I don't understand why people may be scared of cultural differences which are actually quite enriching for our continent. And it has been proven in history that having diverse societies is culturally enriching. One of the best examples is the city of London, for example, but also for the economy. There is also very strong regional economic studies, very strong evidence suggesting that diverse societies are also extremely successful economically. Yeah. So there are differences that perhaps I can understand why you would be afraid of, and you would try to address what I mentioned about neo-Nazis and brutality and being violent. But the other differences, I think there has been a lot of, I guess, trying to give a quick answer to your question, Paul. I think we have experienced the dominance of media outlets and tabloid media press and presenting in a disproportionate level poisonous rhetoric across Europe.
Yeah.
So I think that's why we are afraid of differences which are not really differences, are really superficial.
Well, I think we can get back to that. Briefly, before we go to and take some questions from our Facebook audience, Elisha, why virtual borders? What do you think? And why do a lot of people seem to be afraid of differences?
So if I may, I'll skip to the second part of your questions, because I think also, like, if I look into like virtual borders, for me, to connect a bit to what Dimitri said about it, you can, for me, you can kind of like relate it to like virtual reality, in the sense that it is kind of like part of reality, but it is modeled in a certain direction. And I think that is very much representative of what Dimitri says, is that certain people, certain groups, certain communities are presented in a certain way that some people who wouldn't necessarily know a lot about those communities, about those people, about what they have gone through, have that kind of reality of those people in their minds. But for me, I don't really necessarily think it is a bad thing that people are scared. I think it is a natural reaction to something that is unknown to you. But, and here comes my big but, because don't quote me on that and say like, oh, it's not a problem, people are scared and like, let's close the borders. No, what I'm advocating for is that you take that opportunity of you not knowing the other, you not knowing the other community, you not knowing the other culture, as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity to learn and to understand what makes that differences, and to look beyond maybe the biases that you had already before, and come to this discussion with an open mind and see, okay, how can I approach this? How can I really try to make this better? And how can I understand the other? And I think by really getting to know the other, I mean, saying like the other under this, like on air quotes, you create a certain kind of understanding of how you can also live together. And you kind of realize, okay, the people who are fleeing war, the people who are fleeing economic like disasters or hardships, they are coming here because they want a better life. You can't really be mad at people who come to a place where you have this good life, where you can also have enough of this good life to share with everyone, that they want to have a piece of that cake. You would also, if you were in their situation, you'd probably feel the same thing. You'd also want a better future for your family, a better future for yourself. And I think this is something that people just need to be like also realize, in a sense, that there is enough wealth to go around. Just how it is distributed right now, it is not the correct situation. Right. So in a way, what we would need is that kind of more of solidarity, but also like more of understanding between each other.
So it's a matter of understanding. We have a question from one of our Facebook audience, Barbara, who talks about the word identity, European identity. And I would like to ask you the question: is it possible to have a local identity, a national identity, and a Europe identity at the same time? Isn't it a lot to ask from people? So Yasmin, I don't know, what do you think? I mean, can we have multiple identities?
Yeah, thank you for this question, for the person that asked it, because we are talking about fears of people and ignorance and perception of the other. But I would also love to stress the point that I think, you know, especially Elisha, you speak from a very, I would say, privileged point of view, in the sense that you live in a very wealthy country. I think that Dimitris joins me when I say that, you know, Italians, when they are, you know, reluctant towards migration, they are just, you know, afraid of people coming and stealing their jobs. And then these, you know, the media, I would love to stress the role of media in these invisible borders building, you know, because media just encourage this discourse that migration is a problem, that we have a negative vision of the future of our society because we have a crisis, we only hear about crisis, and then we blame Europe, okay? Politicians like Salvini, Marine Le Pen, Orban, they blame Europe. Europe is the problem of all our corrupted societies, which, you know, is an easy way to take to not take our responsibilities as politicians. But of course, there is more than that. When we speak about identities, people like me are not considered European. That's a fact. That's a fact. When I was awarded the Young European of the Year, being attacked on social media by hundreds of people, it was just a proof that people are afraid of people like me, that people don't see me as a European, and that, like, for me, this is an invisible border. And then what we see with the Black Lives Matter movement, that is also being, you know, it is having an impact also in Europe, and especially in France. Yesterday, we had 120,000 people in the streets of Paris demonstrating for you know, against racism and police violence in our country, in France. So, you know, we, as minorities in Europe, we are seen as not even citizens of our country. So imagine when it comes to Europe, when Europe promotes diversity, which is, you know, the core of the European Union, then at the national level, people are like, let's leave Europe. Look what Europe does. Europe is promoting, is threatening our core identity, which is being white and Christian. That's what I get on my comments on social media, on Twitter. So, you know, we need to ask ourselves the real questions. What is Europe? You know, what Europe we want to build? A Europe where diversity and, you know, African descents are not welcomed because they belong to Africa. So go back to Africa. That's what we hear. Even in demonstration, as I speak, in the UK, we have people demonstrating against migration. Or do we want a Europe where human rights are respected and the order is not vilified, as were Jewish, you know, a long time ago, before the European Union was created?
But my question to all of you is, okay, if we agree that there's a big problem in terms of understanding each other, understanding differences, feeling of solidarity, what can we do? It seems that in America right now, people take to the streets, right? And we also start taking to the streets in Europe. But are there other ways in which we can increase understanding of each other? What do you think we could do? Yeah, Esther, what could be done? I mean, we all agree that it's a big problem.
Yes, it is a problem. But going back to your previous question, I definitely confirm that I feel a European Hungarian or a Hungarian European. It doesn't matter, but I think this double identity exists. And this is actually a very, very important thing, to have both of these identities. But going back also to Yasmin's, talking about the responsibility of the media, is also an important factor. How much information we get from Europe, or how much exchanges, how much we know about Europe, and also what's going on in Europe. For example, in our country, in Hungary, the state media doesn't talk about what's happening outside Hungary, or whether the EU gave something, or whether it's what are the issues, the important issues on the European level, or what are the concerns of other countries, you know, like to understand each other better. I think it would be very important, and that's also my big motivation why I wanted to start this radio show and in this new online radio called Euphoria, to on one hand praise the fact that we belong to Europe, and on the other hand to spread information about what's going on, whether that today is the Schengen anniversary, that what are the issues about Brexit, what are the issues in Germany, what are the issues in Greece or wherever. Because if we understand each other's concern and then we talk about the issues in real terms, then the populist narrative will be less successful, because if people understand more and then they know more about this, then it will be more difficult to fool them or to implant stupid ideas, stupid narratives. And I think there's a huge responsibility also to support independent media outlets, or especially in Hungary, it's really a difficult situation because 90% of the media is controlled by the government, and even the Hungarian news agency is distributing fake news in many cases, and also there is a state propaganda that like it was in the socialist times. And I think that information is a key issue, and that's also that's why it's good that you are so active with the New Europeans as well. Mm-hmm. Because you have to reach out to the people and explain what's going on and give first-hand experiences.
Mm-hmm. One would think that the conversation we are having, if we could multiply that, you know, and think that have thousands of conversations like this, that would make a difference. There's a comment from Ruby who says that he on Facebook, he finds it wonderful to see people watching from all across Europe, breaking boundaries through technology. So is a reason for optimism now through technology of breaking barriers, of increasing understanding. What do you think about that?
If I may add just one last sentence, yeah. I think that that was a positive impact of the coronavirus, that we could reach out to each other more easily, because before the coronavirus, we didn't have these Zoom conferences, we didn't have these talks. I myself participated at several discussions with different people from different countries. And I think it's a great thing, and we should stick with this because it's a very cost-effective way of actually talking with each other, and we can use social media for something positive, and we can outbalance the bad impacts of social media a little bit, or we can show that something is positive is possible. Mm-hmm. And I hope we will stick with this, and we will keep on doing this.
Mm-hmm. How do you see the perspectives, Dimitris?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to briefly come back to your question about whether you can feel European and at the same time from your country. Mm-hmm. It may be interesting to note that the European Values Survey, one of the major surveys measuring opinion and attitudes and other characteristics of Europeans, it has a question: to which geographic group do you feel you belong most? And then the respondents can say their locality or town, so Schengen, for example, or Budapest, or Groningen, or Athens, region or country, or region or country as a whole, Europe, and the world as a whole. So you have to say which one you feel associated with first. And it's interesting to know that 3% of Europeans, all Europeans, they say Europe above everything else. And I would count myself in them. So Europe first, and then my city or country. So 3% say that. Of these 3%, 20% are in Luxembourg. So Luxembourg has the highest number in proportion of Europeans who feel they're European above everything else, and then second, Luxembourg. So that's a very interesting. I think these surveys are conducted quite frequently. So there are ways to measure that, and I would say by the evidence, yes, you can say you are both Greek and European, Dutch and European, and you could even rank that. And interestingly, there are people there is a rapidly growing minority of Europeans, despite the bad press and the scapegoat in the EU, who feel European above everything else, and also who feel citizens of the world as well, which is quite interesting. Now, with regards to what we can do about it and technology, I think what we are doing here is a fantastic example of what we can be doing about that. And I totally agree that COVID-19 highlighted these opportunities and, if you like, abolish further some borders, because we are all together here. And this is an excellent example. And we have thousands of people I can see following us up on Facebook right now and taking part in the conversation. So this is exactly the kind of thing we can be doing. And at the same time, highlighting, going back to what it means to be European, I think being European has to do with values. I think that's the top one. It's not, and these values have to do with they're clearly described in the Copenhagen criteria. It's about human rights, diversity, human life. These are values which are universal between religions as well. So it's not about different religions, it's whether you uphold these values. I think that's, so you could ask people if they feel European, but then you can also ask and see whether they uphold these values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Elijah?
Thank you so much. And I think there's a lot have been said, and like, I think there's a way, like, a bit connecting everything, like also what Yasmin told me before prior, that I also talk out of a certain position out of privilege. And yes, I'm well aware. Like, I think it's always important to tell people if there is a certain kind of privilege they enjoy, because it's not always obvious to people. And I think kind of Dimitri's also highlights this, right? If you are from Luxembourg, you are more likely to be pro-European. I think one of the reasons is also because we don't have technically a own internal market. I mean, you can be a hairdresser in Luxembourg and have an international clientele, just because it is such a small country that relies on like a doubling of the working population that just comes in from abroad and like to work there every day. So I think that is, of course, a certain kind of tint to how I feel, and which is also why I'd say that I feel European as well, and that the different dimensions of identity don't necessarily cancel each other out, and they also never, I mean, I hope at least, they are never fixed in point in time. Because I think about identity should be something that is in flux and which can evolve and can like adapt and say, okay, maybe this belief that we had in the past was wrong. I think right now it's also kind of like the whole reckoning with the Black Lives Matter movement, that more and more people want to actively be anti-racist. So actively say, okay, we are not just going to stay silent when we see racism, but we're also going to actively say something against this. So I think that is also something that needs to be part of an identity, and that how an identity adapts over time. Now, regarding the virtual possibilities, or the possibilities that have been launched by like the COVID crisis, I think one, definitely a fan of more Zoom conferences instead of having those 1 hour meetings where nothing really is discussed. And then after, in the end, you ask yourself, okay, why did I go there? But I do think we also need to be aware of that the infrastructure maybe for internet, or not every household has a very good access to that internet, or has the possibility to give every person in the household a computer or a tablet. And that's something that I kind of like more experience as perspective from a student. For a while, it's fine to have this kind of online interactions, for instance, there's lectures, but me personally, I really prefer the face-to-face interaction, just because you have more kind of visual cues going on, more kind of like direct answers, and there's no necessarily need for a moderator, you know, those things. So even though we have all of those possibilities of like the internet connecting the world really, yet again, and it not being ruined by trolls on social media, we also need to be aware that as long as the digital infrastructure isn't like at a high standard everywhere in Europe, that people are also going to be disadvantaged by just moving everything online.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot for this comment. There are a number of comments from our Facebook audience that relate to the Schengen agreement, that it needs to be improved now. I think we're getting towards the end of our conversation. And we know that next Thursday, the heads of state and government will meet online to talk about the future of Europe. So I think it might be a good idea for us to give them some advice. You know, what should they say? If you were at the table, I think we would start with that, and then maybe tying it onto the Schengen agreement. Well, Dimitris, what should they say if you were at the table?
Okay, I think there should be more solidarity, not just between countries, but also between regions. And just following up the previous points we all made, I think it will be very interesting and powerful to enhance the thinking of Europe of regions and Europe of people instead of nations. So, for example, if it is deemed appropriate to close the borders, to restrict, to have a lockdown for a particular region, we should think of this in terms of regions, not countries. So if we think that we have to control transportation or traveling, then it shouldn't be borders between countries, but regions that have been heavily affected. There should be huge solidarity with these regions, make sure that the economy of that region survives and ameliorate any negative effects. And at the same time, make sure that contagion is controlled, but thinking of it regionally, not nationally, which is in contrast to what has been happening. We had countries closing their borders in many cases, and without considering what happens within there are some exceptions to that, but I think there is a lot of room for improvement, and also thinking of Europe in terms of regions, not nation states.
Great. So that's one message to our heads of state and government. Esther, what's your message to them next Thursday?
Yeah, I think that external border controls should be more Europeanized in this sense. So I think it should be, the European competences should be increased in terms of external border control. And also, I agree with Dimitris that it's not the nations, but the people and the regions who should be more connected, or in the sense, we can talk about transportation, or like railway connections. Like from Budapest, I cannot go to Hamburg with the auto train, the car train. I have to go over to Vienna, and there I can take the train to go over to Hamburg without changing the train. And I think that this interconnectivity between internally between the Schengen countries, and also with environmental friendly transportation, like railway, for example, or that you don't have to change 5 times if you want to go somewhere within the Schengen area, that would be a great achievement, in my opinion.
All right. So much better train connections in Europe.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
That could be one message from you. And Elisha, what's your message too?
Oh, there's so many messages that I would like to pass
Well,
on.
I mean, give us just 2 or 3.
Okay, I'll give you 3.
Okay,
then.
very good.
Okay, so first and foremost, I think it's unacceptable that a country such as Europe allows people to die in the Mediterranean Sea. I think we definitely need to do more, and we need to step up our game, and that the distribution key needs to happen, and that every country has to take on migrants and refugees, because it's unacceptable. Second, we should make the most of the future, like the leaders should make the most of the Future of Europe conference, and should not forget to think about like beyond the boxes. Maybe, for instance, having allowing European citizens in other countries to also participate in national elections. Like, for instance, there's a European Citizens Initiative that looks for that, like voters beyond borders, it's called, without borders. And they are really promoting and saying, okay, hey, it's not natural that when I cross the border, I lose one of the most essential rights, which is the right to participate in national elections. And third, and the last thing is really to go big on the next MFF, like on the next budget of the European Union, because yes, we had the sanitary crisis of the coronavirus, but we should also not forget one of the biggest threats that is looming, which is the climate crisis. And all of those things together, all of the problems that currently we face right now, they are ambitious. And so the response by the European Union also needs to be ambitious, and they should not be stingy on that.
Okay, thanks a lot. 3 good suggestions. And Yasmin.
Thank you. I mean, so many interesting and good points arose by the other panelists. I can't agree more. I can't agree more with Elisha. I can't agree more with also Dimitris. But if I can maybe add something different from what has been already said, it's also linked to Elisha's talk. Let's be bold, but also let's be bold on our values. You know, we have been created, and that's what Roger and I try to remember, is that we have been created after decades of war by anti-fascist people that fought, risk their life for freedom. So I ask the European Union to guarantee this freedom in Hungary, but also in the other countries of Europe where religious, individual rights are being threatened, and where also people, attack us as migrants, daughters and sons, and refugees, as diverse people. I don't like the term diversity, but just to make you understand, everything that is not white, basically, is seen as a threat. And I also speak for, I also think about Roma people. We've had the support of the RD group that I thank. Jelena, the coordinator, she's a Roma minority. and the European Parliament, the RD group of the European Parliament, anti-racism, they are promoting the next week at the European Parliament a resolution against racism, and I support them, and I can't be more proud to collaborate with them on this, because I think that, you know, this is a time where we should be bold and remind ourselves that the European Union is most of all a union of, you know, unity, united in diversity. And so, yeah, this is my main point.
But maybe this conversation should launch many more conversations about these challenges of maybe hidden racism also in Europe. I mean, hitching on to what goes on in the United States now. Actually, there's a question or a comment from Phil, who asks, does fear of others stem from Europe's colonial past? So maybe we need to talk about our past more in depth across Europe. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we do. You know, we also would love to have a conversation on this, because I think that by the way, the resolution of the European Parliament RD group is gonna also address this, because, you know, I think we didn't talk enough about this colonial past in history classes. We don't study it. In my Italian history classes, we still acknowledge Mussolini's positive sides. And that's an insult to our history, because I don't think that Mussolini should be still, you know, recognized for what he did good. He didn't do good at all. He was a dictator. So we need to reform our history books and you know, programs. But this is another topic.
We have 4 minutes to go of our conversation. One idea that will increase the feeling of being European. So, I mean, lots of stuff about the rational thinking, but the feeling of being European. You have one idea per person. Dimitri, what should we do to feel?
I think this reminds me of, I think it was Bono, the frontman of U2, who a few years back, he said in the European People's Party, I think, conference in Dublin, that Europe is a thought that needs to become a feeling. He said that we should make it more of a feeling. And I would say to that we need to find things that we as Europeans, we are passionate about. It's not just about economic interests, or it is a good economic project, or stronger in, as it was the motto of the Remain campaign in Britain. It should be positive. It should be something to celebrate what Europe is about. It should be about diversity, communality, cohesion, a continent where we have so many cultures, so many languages, and we all at the same time share the same values. So we have to have a positive message, what Europe is about. And I totally agree with what Yasmin said about history books. We need to highlight that, also highlight the dark colonial past, and talk about the future in a positive way.
Well, we still have 3 minutes to go. Alicia, your one way of increasing the feeling of Europeanness.
I'll stick to one. So for me, it's definitely Erasmus Plus and like allowing the exchange between cultures. Okay. But I would like to see that expanded to also include more vocational training, more people and training, like exchanges between different jobs that, for instance, don't necessarily require traveling, such as a carpenter, like a carpenter from Germany going to exchange like with a carpenter in Hungary or so. Okay. So definitely that.
Thanks a lot. And Esther? One idea?
Europe is our common homeland, and we are brothers and sisters in this huge family.
Okay, so using the family metaphor, you know, yes. And Yasmin, final point, 15 seconds.
I don't know. I mean, so many good points arose, but if there is one thing, is really reminding ourselves of our human side. And Europe is most of all the example of peace. So peace means also accepting the other and not vilifying him or her. So yeah, just a message of peace, a message of unity, a message of resilience, and standing strong against hate and racism.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your participation in this conversation. Thank you to the Facebook audience. Thank you to the organizers of this event, Ethnos, Elisa Merenghetti, you Europeans, Roger Casali, and thank you to you, Yasmin, and thank you to the Europe Future Fringe. We hope that you will join other conversations. You can check out New Europeans' website, where you'll find a lot of information about what goes on in Europe at the moment. So thanks a lot, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. Thanks.